You think I care who your father is? Madison said, ease. Her voice flat, her eyes steady, holding the invoice out without a single tremor in her hand. Ease. Every man who's ever stood in front of me thought a famous name was enough. Ease. It never was. Logan stared at her. He wasn't used to this. Ease. Nobody talked to him like this in Silver Creek. Nobody talked to him like this anywhere. Ease. He laughed, the kind of laugh that was meant to be a warning. Ease. He had no idea what he was standing in front of. If this story already has you hooked, please do us a favor, hit that subscribe button, follow along until the very end, please, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. Please, we want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. Please. The call came in at 6:43 in the morning. Please. And Madison Carter almost didn't answer it. She was 3 knuckles deep into a busted alternator bracket on a 2019 Ram pickup that belonged to old Earl Hutchins. And she had grease on her forearm up to her elbow. And the radio in the bay was playing something low and country. And she was for the first time in what felt like weeks completely at peace. Then the dispatch line rang. She peeled off her glove, grabbed the receiver, and said what she always said. Carter Towing. What have you got? The voice on the other end was not the kind of voice she usually heard at 6:43 in the morning. It was smooth, confident, and slightly annoyed, the voice of someone who considered being inconvenienced a personal insult. Yeah, I need a truck out on Route 9, about 4 miles past the Clearwater Junction. Black GMC Sierra. Lifted. Custom rims. You can't miss it. I've got your location, Madison said. What's the issue? Transmission, I think. It just won't engage. A pause. Look, I'm going to need this handled fast. I've got places to be. Estimated arrival is 40 minutes. Standard service call. We'll assess on site and give you an invoice before we do any work. Another pause. Longer this time. Did you say 40 minutes? Yes. Sir. That's unacceptable. I need someone out here in 20. Madison looked at the clock on the wall. She looked at Earl's truck. She looked at Danny, her 22-year-old assistant, who was watching her from the other side of the bay with a rag over his shoulder and the expression of someone who already knew what she was going to say. 40 minutes is our honest estimate, she said. I won't give you a number I can't keep. The man on the other end made a sound, not quite a sigh. Not quite a scoff. Something between the two that meant he was recalibrating. Fine, you know who I am? You gave me a first name and a vehicle description. Logan Whitmore. She waited. My father is Ray Whitmore. She waited again. Ray Whitmore. The fighter. Golden Gloves. 1,987. Montana's most decorated amateur heavyweight. He fought professionally for 11 years. His gym is the biggest one in the county. Bull so sharpened slightly. As if repeating the name louder would help. Surely you've heard of him. I have, Madison said. I'll have someone out to you in 40 minutes, Mr. Whitmore, is there anything else you need in the meantime? There was a long silence. The kind that told her he wasn't used to that answer. No, he said finally, just be quick. She hung up. Danny raised his eyebrows. Whitmore, he said. Ray's son, she said, pulling her glove back on. Take the flatbed. Route 9. 4 miles past Clearwater Junction. Black Sierra. You want me to go alone? She looked at Earl's truck. Give me 20 minutes to finish this bracket, and I'll follow in the service truck. Go ahead and start the paperwork. Danny nodded and grabbed his keys. He was already halfway out the door when he turned back. He sound like a problem? Madison picked up her wrench. They always think they are, she said. Go. Danny got there in 38 minutes. Which was 2 minutes under the estimate, which was the kind of thing that mattered to Madison Carter even when nobody was watching. He found Logan Whitmore exactly where she'd expected, leaning against the driver's side door of a truck that cost more than most people in Silver Creek made in a year. Arms crossed, jaw set, wearing the expression of a man who had been inconvenienced and wanted the world to know it. Logan was in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that came from a gym rather than labor. He was wearing a clean jacket despite it being barely 50 degrees. And he had sunglasses pushed up into his hair, even though the sky was overcast. Ease. He looked at Danny's truck pulling up and seemed to relax by about 2 degrees, just enough for someone paying attention to notice. "Is you the driver?" Logan asked, pushing off the door. "Is Danny Reyes Carter Towing?" Danny held out his hand. "Is let's take a look at what you've got." Logan glanced at the hand. Is shook it briefly and stepped aside to let Danny near the truck. Ease. He stood close while Danny ran through his initial check, not helpful close. Ease. But hovering close, the kind of close that meant he wanted to demonstrate he was monitoring the situation. "Transmission," Danny asked, "won't shift out of park." Ease. It just locked up, out of nowhere. Danny slid underneath for a minute. Ease. Came back out, checked the linkage, tried the shift interlock button. Ease. He stood up and wiped his hands. "It's your shift interlock solenoid," he said. "Ease. Not a transmission failure. Good news, it's a relatively simple fix." Ease. Bad news is we can't do it here on the side of the road. Ease. We'll tow it back to the shop and have your diagnosis confirmed before we touch anything. Logan nodded slowly. Ease. How long is that going to take? Depends on parts availability. Ease. Could be today. Could be tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. Logan repeated the words, the way people repeat something they've been told that they don't accept. Ease. I need that truck back today. I understand. We'll do our best. Ease. But I can't promise what I can't guarantee. Logan looked at him for a moment. Ease. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something, held it up. Ease. You see that? That's my father's business page. 4.8 stars. Ease. 800 reviews. He does more business in this county than almost anyone. Ease. You know how many referrals Carter Towing gets from his gem? Danny kept his face neutral. I'm not sure. Enough to matter. Logan put the phone away. Ease. So maybe factor that in when you're thinking about how fast you want to get this done. Danny took a breath. Ease. Sir, I'm going to be straight with you. The speed of the repair doesn't change based on who refers business to us. Ease. It changes based on parts availability and the actual work required. Ease. My boss operates on honest timelines and honest prices. Ease. That's the deal. Logan stared at him. Something shifted in his expression, not quite anger. Ease, but the precursor to it. The moment before a man decides someone is worth being angry at. Ease. That was when Madison's service truck pulled up behind the flatbed. Ease. She stepped out in her work jacket and her Carter Towing cap. Ease. Her blonde hair pulled back, grease still, on the back of her right hand from Earl's alternator bracket. Ease. She was average height, average build, and moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing physical work for a long time and had stopped thinking about it consciously. Ease. Logan's eyes went to her immediately. She could tell from the way his posture adjusted, a subtle thing. Ease. Barely visible. But she'd seen it before. He'd looked at Danny and seen a subordinate. Ease. He looked at her and tried to figure out where she fit. Ease. You're the owner, he said. Madison Carter. She didn't extend her hand. Ease. She walked directly to the truck, ran her own eyes over what Danny had found. Ease. Checked the linkage herself. Danny's assessment is right. Ease. Shift interlock solenoid. We'll tow it in, confirm the diagnosis. Ease. Write up an estimate before we do anything. I already told your guy I need this today. I heard. She straightened up. Ease. We'll make every effort. I can't guarantee a time until I know what the parts situation looks like. Logan tilted his head slightly. Ease. Do you know who I am? You're Ray Whitmore's son. Ease. You told me on the phone. She met his eyes without any particular expression. Ease. That doesn't change the parts situation. Something flickered in his face. Ease. It wasn't quite offense, but it was close. My family has been in this county for 30 years. Ease. We've built things here. Businesses. Community relationships. Ease. When we need something done, everyone's treated the same here, Madison said. Ease. That's not a policy we bend. Logan stared at her. Ease. She held his gaze without flinching. The wind came across Route 9 and lifted a loose strand of her hair, and she pushed it back behind her ear and waited. Ease. You're serious, he said. I'm always serious when it comes to my shop's standards. He looked at her for a long moment. Ease. Then he looked at Danny. Then he looked back at her. He's fine, he said. Load it up. She nodded to Danny. Ease. Who began positioning the flatbed. Madison walked back to her service truck and pulled out her clipboard and started the intake paperwork. Ease. Behind her, she could hear Logan making a phone call, his voice low. Ease, but not low enough. Yeah. It's a tow shop. Carter towing. Some woman running it. Stubborn as hell. A pause. He's, I know, I'll handle it. Madison kept writing on her clipboard. He's. Her pen didn't stop moving. Her expression didn't change. He's. She had heard variations of that conversation more times than she could count. He's. It never used to touch her. It still didn't. But there was something about this particular version. This particular man, that made the back of her neck go quiet in a way she recognized. She'd learned a long time ago to pay attention to that feeling. Carter Towing sat on the eastern edge of Silver Creek, on a lot that Madison's father, Gerald Carter, had purchased in 1991 with a small business loan and an enormous amount of stubbornness. He'd built it into a two-bay shop with a solid reputation and a roster of regular clients that ran from private individuals to 3 local commercial contractors and 1 county road services agreement. When Gerald died 4 years ago quietly in his sleep, from a heart that had simply worn out, he left the business to Madison without debt, without drama, and with a handwritten note that said, keep it honest and it'll keep you. She'd framed the note. It hung above her desk in the back office. She'd also inherited the building, 2 trucks, 1 flat, a full set of diagnostic equipment, and a filing system that made complete sense if you'd watched her father organize it for 20 years. And almost no sense if you hadn't. Danny had been her hire. She'd found him through a vocational program at the county high school. He'd been 17. He's interested in mechanics and responsible in a way that was rare in someone that age. She'd taken him on part-time, then full-time after he graduated. And now he ran the shop when she was in the field and kept the books when she was in the bay. And he was the only person on the payroll because that was all she needed and all she could afford to run the way she wanted to run it. Silver Creek itself was the kind of Montana town that outsiders assumed was dying and insiders knew was just quiet. About 4,000 people, 3 street, 3 churches. A diner, a bar. A hardware store. A pharmacy. And a feed supply place that also sold fishing gear and propane. The Whitmore Gym sat on the corner of Elk Street and 2nd Avenue. And it had been there for almost as long as Carter Towing. Ray Whitmore was genuinely beloved in Silver Creek. He'd trained local kids for free, donated to the school's athletic program. Raised money during the 2019 flooding that had taken out several homes on the south side of town. His name was on a plaque in the community center. People waved at him on the street. His son was a different matter. Logan had grown up in Silver Creek and left for college in Seattle. Come back briefly. Left again. Spent several years apparently doing something in commercial real estate in Billings. And returned 18 months ago when Ray's health started declining. He drove the kind of truck you drove when you wanted people to know you'd done well. He dressed in the kind of clothes that said the same thing. He treated Silver Creek the way people sometimes treat a place they grew up in when they've convinced themselves they outgrew it with a tolerance that was barely disguised condescension. Madison knew the type. She knew it in her bones. She'd met men like Logan in rooms far more dangerous than a tow yard. They got the Sierra on the flatbed and back to the shop by mid-morning. Madison ran the full diagnostic while Danny handled the phones and the 2 other calls that came in during that window. The solenoid was confirmed. Parts availability was the variable. She called the regional supplier. Shift interlock solenoid for a 2021 GMC Sierra. Lifted package. She waited. Yeah, I'll hold. She held for 4 minutes, during which Logan paced back and forth in the customer waiting area, a small room with 3 chairs, a coffee maker, a rack of Field and Stream magazines from 2022, and a window that looked into the service bay. She could see him through the glass. He was on his phone, texting, occasionally glancing up to monitor her. The supplier came back. Next day delivery on the solenoid. Early as possible. Or I've got a shop in Billings that might have one in stock. I can get you the number. Madison made a note. Give me the Billings number. She called Billings. They had the part. She arranged a same-day courier and additional costs she'd pass through at wholesale. No markup, because that was the kind of shop she ran, and confirmed the part would arrive by 4 in the afternoon. Ease. She walked into the waiting area and told Logan, "The part is being couriered from Billings. Ease, it'll be here by 4. Repair takes about 90 minutes. Ease, you can have your truck back by 5:30, 6 at the latest." Logan looked up from his phone. Ease, that's today? That's today. Something shifted in his face. Ease. Not gratitude exactly, but the closest thing to it he seemed capable of expressing. Ease. Okay, that works. Good. Here's the preliminary estimate. She handed him the form. Ease. He looked at it, and the shift happened in reverse. Ease. $740 for the part. Ease. The diagnostic and the labor. The courier fee is broken out separately. You'll see it listed. That's, he shook his head. Ease. My buddy got his done in Billings for $450. Then he got a good deal in Billings, Madison said evenly. Ease. This is what it cost here, with same-day turnaround and a couriered part. I'm not paying $740 for a solenoid job. You're paying for same-day service with a couriered part from Billings, Ease, which is $112 of that total. Ease. If you want to wait for next-day delivery from the regional supplier, Ease, I can get that cost down to around $580. That's still too high. Madison held his gaze. Ease, would you like me to break out the line items? I want you to recognize who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, she said. Ease, someone who needs a solenoid replaced today. The price is the price. Ease, Mr. Whitmore. If it doesn't work for you, I can give you the Billings shop's number, and they can arrange their own courier. Logan stood up. Ease. He was taller than her by 6 inches, and he used that height the way some men did, not as a threat exactly. Ease, but as a reminder. He took a step closer than was necessary. Ease. I don't think you understand how things work in this town, he said quietly. Ease. Madison didn't move. Not a half step back. Not a shift in her weight. Ease. Not a single adjustment in her expression. I think I understand them fine, she said. Ease. The silence between them was long enough for Danny to notice from the service bay and go very still. Ease. Then Logan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at her. Ease. Whatever he'd been building toward, he let it go for now. Ease. Approve the estimate, he said. Get it done. He turned and walked out to his car, a loaner from somewhere, without signing anything. Ease. Madison watched him go. Then she walked back to the bay. Ease. You okay? Danny said. Fine, she pulled her gloves on. Ease. Call me when the courier confirms the departure time. The part arrived at 3:50. Ease. Madison did the repair herself, which was not strictly necessary. Danny could have done it, but she wanted her hands on this particular vehicle on this particular day. Ease. She needed to know it was done right, documented right, Ease, and invoiced exactly as quoted. She finished at 5:15. Ease. She tested the shift mechanism through 7 complete cycles. Ease. She wrote the final invoice with every line item accounted for. Ease. She walked it out to the front desk and called Logan's number. Ease. Truck's ready. He arrived 20 minutes later. Ease. He walked in, looked at the Sierra sitting in the lot, walked up to the counter. Madison slid the invoice across. Ease. He looked at it for a long time, then he looked up at her. Ease. This says $740. The same as the estimate you approved. I told you I wasn't paying that. You approved the work order, verbally. Ease. I didn't sign anything. Madison reached under the counter and pulled out the call recording disclosure form that every customer received at intake, the one that explained that all service calls were recorded for quality assurance purposes. Ease. And the audio file log from the dispatch system. Ease, which she turned her monitor to show him. You approved the work when you said, approve the estimate. Ease. Get it done at 11:22 this morning, she said. Ease. That's a verbal authorization and it's documented. His jaw tightened. Ease. I want to talk to someone above you. There's no one above me. Ease. This is my shop. He put both hands flat on the counter. Ease. I'm Ray Whitmore's son. I know. My father has been sending business to this shop for years, he has. And every job he's sent has been invoiced at exactly the rate quoted and completed on time. Ease. His account is clean and I'm grateful for the referrals. Then you should want to keep that relationship. I do. Ease. That doesn't change this invoice. The room was very quiet. Ease. Logan looked at her with an expression she could only describe as disbelief, the genuine. Ease. Personal kind. The kind that meant he had truly not anticipated this outcome. Please. You are making a mistake, he said. Madison reached under the counter again and pulled out a business card from the County Consumer Services office. She placed it next to the invoice. If you feel the charge is unjust, please. That's the number to call for a billing dispute. They can review the documentation and the recording. She kept her voice completely level. Please. Or you can pay the invoice, take your truck, and we're done. Please. Those are your options. Logan picked up the business card. Please. He looked at it. He set it back down. He pulled out his wallet. Please. He paid. He didn't say a word while the transaction processed. Please. He took his receipt, took his keys, walked out to the Sierra without looking back. Please. She heard the door close. She heard the engine start smooth now. Please. No hitching, no locking up, just the clean sound of a truck that was fixed and ready. Please. She heard him drive away. Danny let out a long, slow breath from somewhere in the bay. Please. That, he said, was something. Close up the diagnostics log and file the invoice, Madison said. Please. Walking back toward the service bay. I need to finish Earl's bracket before I lose the light. She picked up her wrench. Please. The radio was still playing something low and country. Please. She had a feeling, settled deep in the back of her chest. Please. Quiet and old and entirely familiar, that Logan Whitmore was not finished with her. Please. She'd had that feeling before. She knew what it usually meant. Please. She tightened the bracket. She tested the tension. Please. She moved on to the next thing. Outside, Silver Creek went on, being exactly what it was, small and quiet and full of people who thought they knew each other completely. Nobody in that town knew Madison Carter completely. He's not even close. 3 days passed before the first sign came. It wasn't dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was the kind of thing that, on its own, meant nothing. A phone call from Henderson Logistics. One of her 3 commercial contracts, saying they were reviewing their service partnerships and would be in touch after the first of the month. Madison had worked with Henderson Logistics for 4 years. She'd never missed a call, never padded an invoice. Never left one of their vehicles on the side of a road longer than it needed to be. She thanked the office manager for the call and sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she opened a new folder on her desk. She labeled it simply with the date. She wrote down the call time received, name of the person who called, exact wording used. She put the folder in her filing cabinet. She went back to work. The second sign came 2 days after that, from a different direction. A woman named Patricia Eldridge, who ran the county's property management group and had sent Carter Towing 6 jobs in the past year, called to say she'd decided to consolidate her service providers and would be going with a shop out of Billings going forward. Billings was 45 minutes away. Patricia Eldridge had specifically chosen Carter Towing 12 months ago because they were local and reliable. Madison thanked her. She asked if there was any specific feedback that had led to the change. No, Patricia said quickly. Nothing specific. Just a business decision. Her voice had the quality of someone reading from a script they didn't write. Madison opened the folder. She wrote down the call. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for exactly 30 seconds. Then she called Danny into the office. Someone is working our accounts, she said. Danny leaned against the doorframe. He was young enough that his face still showed everything he was thinking. Right now it showed concern and the beginning of anger. Whitmore, I can't prove it yet. What do we do? Madison tapped the folder. We document every call, every cancellation, every hesitation. We note the exact language people use, because people who are repeating someone else's words sound different from people who are speaking for themselves. And we stay calm. He's trying to tank us. He's trying to pressure us. There's a difference. She met Danny's eyes. Pressure only works if you react to it. We're not going to react to it. Danny looked at the folder. Then at her. You've dealt with this before. It wasn't quite a question. Madison picked up her pen. Go check the oil on the service truck. The level was low this morning. He knew when she was done talking. He went. She opened the folder again. She looked at the 2 entries. She turned to a fresh page and began writing a timeline, not of the calls, But of the entire sequence, starting from the moment Logan Whitmore had called dispatch on Route 9 at 6:43 in the morning and said his father's name like it was a key that should open any lock. She wrote quickly. From memory. With the precision of someone who had learned in a different life. In different rooms, that the details you didn't write down were the ones that would eventually matter most. The afternoon light shifted. The radio in the bay played on. Danny worked in the background with the quiet steadiness that was one of his best qualities. And Madison Carter wrote down everything she knew. And everything she suspected, and everything she intended to remember. Because she had lived long enough to know that the real fight was never the one that announced itself. It was always the one that crept in quietly, through the back door. Wearing the face of an inconvenience, and she had never, not once, not ever lost that kind of fight. The fourth call came on a Tuesday. This time, it was Ron Bassett, who ran the county road maintenance contracting office and had been sending work to Carter Towing through the municipal services agreement for going on 3 years. He called at 9 in the morning, and Madison had barely gotten her first cup of coffee down when Danny put the call through to the back office with a look on his face that told her everything before she picked up the receiver. Madison, Ron said. He had a voice like gravel and a manner that was usually direct. Right now he sounded like a man standing at the edge of something he didn't want to fall into. I need to let you know the county is doing a review of all contracted service providers. Standardizing the evaluation process. You'll receive a formal notice by the end of the week. Okay, she said. How long has this review been in the planning? A pause. Too long, a few weeks, he said. It's across the board. Ron. She kept her voice even. We've worked together for 3 years. You've never mentioned a review process in that time. Has anything changed with the quality of our service? No. No, nothing like that. He cleared his throat. It's just a process thing. You know how it is. I do, she said. I'll look for the formal notice. She hung up. She opened the folder. She wrote down the call. Then she sat very still for a moment. Because 3 accounts showing instability in 9 days was no longer a coincidence, and she was done pretending it might be. This was a pattern. Someone had made phone calls. Someone had used language carefully enough that none of these people felt comfortable saying the name out loud. But not carefully enough to hide that they were all operating from the same source. She wrote a name at the top of the page in the folder. Logan Whitmore. Then she underlined it. Then she got up, walked into the bay, picked up a wrench, and got back to work. Because falling apart was a luxury she had never been able to afford and didn't intend to start affording now. Danny was watching her from the other side of the bay. He'd learned not to push when she had that particular set to her jaw. But she could feel him watching, and she could feel the worry coming off him in waves. And that bothered her more than any of the phone calls had. Danny was 22. He'd signed on to work at a tow shop. Not to become collateral in a war with a man who had too much inherited ego and not enough earned wisdom. Whatever was coming, she was going to make sure it didn't land on him. She just didn't know yet how to guarantee that. What she didn't know, what she couldn't see, was what Logan had already set in motion by the time she wrote his name at the top of that page. He'd made his first call the same night he'd driven away from Carter Towing, with his paid receipt in his hand and his pride scraped raw. He'd called Frank Delaney, who was the managing director of Henderson Logistics and who owed Ray Whitmore 3 favors going back to a business dispute in 2018 that Ray had helped resolve quietly. Logan hadn't asked Frank to do anything explicitly harmful. He'd simply said he'd had an unsatisfying experience with Carter Towing. Wondered aloud whether the shop was as reliable as its reputation suggested, and let the silence after that sentence do its work. Frank Delaney was the kind of man who read between lines for a living. He made a call the next morning. Patricia Eldridge had come from a different angle. Logan knew her through a commercial property deal he'd been peripherally involved in during his Billings years. He'd taken her to lunch 3 days after the towing incident. Paid for a very good meal and said again, without saying anything exactly, that he was concerned about the long-term stability of certain small businesses in Silver Creek that relied too heavily on a single owner-operator. He'd mentioned Carter, towing by name, in a sentence about the county's services landscape. And the way he'd said the name had carried just enough doubt to do its job. Ron Bassett was the third, and Ron had been the hardest, because Ron was more honest than the other two, and it had taken Logan 3 separate conversations to get him to this point. But Ron was also applying for a county facilities director position that required several favorable references. And Logan had mentioned, in passing, that his father sat on the County Development Advisory Board. None of these things were illegal. That was the most infuriating part of it. Logan Whitmore had not threatened anyone, had not lied to anyone in a provable way. Had not done anything that would hold up in a room as misconduct. He had simply applied pressure through a network of relationships that his father had built over 30 years, relationships that Logan was now converting into a currency Ray Whitmore had never intended them to be. And the town, small as it was, watched without quite seeing. Because the thing about a man with a famous father in a small town is that people want to give him the benefit of the doubt. They want to believe the apple hasn't fallen too far. They want to think the good in the father transferred like a blessing to the son. Madison knew better. She had always known better. She just hadn't known, until 9 days ago, that he would point that particular truth in her direction. The formal notice from the county came on Thursday, as Ron had said it would. It was 2 pages of procedural language that meant, when translated into plain English, that Carter Towing's municipal service contract would be under evaluation for 60 days, and that no new service calls would be dispatched through the agreement during that period. Danny read it over her shoulder and said nothing for a moment. The county contract is 15% of our monthly revenue, he said finally. I know. Combined with Henderson and Eldridge, that's 23%, she said. I know, Danny. He was quiet again. Then what do we do? Madison folded the notice and put it in the folder. The folder was getting thick now. We do the work, she said. We do it exactly the way we've always done it. We don't cut corners. We don't reduce quality, and we don't let a gap in one revenue stream make us sloppy in another. And Whitmore? She turned to look at him fully. I want you to listen to me carefully. You don't do anything about Whitmore. You don't say his name in town. You don't get into conversations about this at the diner or the hardware store or anywhere else. You keep your head down and you do your job. Madison, this is not your fight. Danny. It kind of is, he said quietly. You know that. Right? I work here. If this place goes under, he stopped. Swallowed. I'm not walking away from this. She looked at him for a long time. He meant it. That was the thing about Danny Reyes. He was young enough to still mean exactly what he said. You're not going to have to, she said. But I need you to trust my process. Can you do that? He looked at the folder on the desk. Then back at her. He said, okay, good. Go check on the Henderson truck. Earl called this morning. He's got a brake job coming in at 2. She didn't sleep well that Thursday night, which was unusual for her. Madison Carter had always been a deep sleeper. It was something she'd developed out of necessity. Years ago, in a life that required you to rest when you could, because you never knew when you wouldn't be able to. But that night, she lay awake and stared at the ceiling of the small house, adjacent to the shop that she'd lived in her entire life. And she did what she almost never let herself do. She counted the numbers. With the 3 accounts compromised or suspended, the monthly shortfall was just over $4,000. The shop's reserves could cover that for approximately 4 months before she'd need to make structural decisions, reduce hours, defer maintenance on the trucks, start declining jobs that weren't profitable enough to justify the overhead. 4 months. That was her window. She could build it back up. She'd done it before, in harder circumstances. The question was whether Logan Whitmore intended to stop at 3 accounts or whether this was just the first wave. She thought about the way he'd looked at her across the counter. The way he'd said, "You are making a mistake," and meant it as a prophecy. Not just a warning. He wasn't done. She knew it the way she knew things that lived in her body rather than her mind, the deep. Ease. Practiced instinct of someone who had spent years learning to read the intentions of people who were skilled at hiding them. Ease. She sat up at 2 in the morning and went to her desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. Ease. Under the files and the folded maps and the manual for the diagnostic equipment she never needed to reference anymore. Ease. There was a lockbox. She took it out. She placed it on the desk and looked at it for a long time without opening it. Ease. It was olive green heavy-gauge steel, about the size of a hardcover book. Ease. She hadn't opened it in 14 months. She put it back in the drawer. Ease. She closed the drawer. She went back to bed and lay there until 5:15 when her alarm went off. Ease. And she got up and started the coffee and pulled on her work jacket and went out to open the bay. Ease. There were still jobs to do. There were still customers who needed her. Ease. As long as that was true, she had a reason to keep moving. Ease. She just needed to make sure Logan Whitmore didn't take those reasons away before she was ready to answer him. Ease. The following Monday, he came to the shop. Ease. She was in the bay when she heard his truck in the lot. Ease. And she knew it was him before she looked up, because she'd learned the sound of that engine over the course of his service appointment, and her memory for mechanical sounds was precise in the way that mechanics' memories tended to be. Ease. She kept working. She heard the door to the customer area open. Ease. She heard Danny's voice. Professionally neutral, Mr. Ease. Whitmore. Can I help you? I need to speak with Madison Carter. She's with a vehicle right now. Ease. If you'd like to wait, I'll wait. She finished the connection she was working on. She was not going to leave a job half done because Logan Whitmore had decided to make a social call, then wiped her hands and walked through to the customer area. Ease. He was standing at the counter, not sitting. That was intentional. Ease. He was wearing the clean jacket again. He had an air about him that she recognized immediately as the particular confidence of a man who thought he was about to win something. He's Logan, she said. I want to talk about the situation, he said. What situation is that? He tilted his head very slightly. The way people do when they're deciding how honest to be. The business situation. I think there's been a misunderstanding between us. And I'd like to resolve it. She folded her arms. Not aggressively, just settled. All right. He pulled out the chair from the counter. Sat down and leaned forward in the way of someone who was about to offer something he wanted her to feel grateful for. Look, he said, I'm not an unreasonable person. The other week, things got tense. You run a tight operation, and I respect that. But I think we can come to an arrangement that benefits both of us. What kind of arrangement? My father's gym generates a lot of service needs. Vehicles, equipment transport, member roadside assistance referrals. Right now that goes to 4 or 5 different providers depending on availability. He paused. I'm looking at consolidating. One preferred provider. Significant volume, reliable revenue, paid on the 1st of every month. She looked at him. And in exchange, he spread his hands open and easy. A preferential rate. Nothing unreasonable. 10% off standard billing for all Whitmore-referred accounts. And the county review process. His expression didn't flicker. I wouldn't know anything about that. I'm sure, she said. And Henderson Logistics, Patricia Eldridge, business relationships change. I can't speak to every decision other people make. He maintained the open hands, the easy posture. What I'm offering you is a path forward. Madison, a stable one. She looked at him for a long moment. He held her gaze. He was good at this, she'd give him that. He had the smooth, practiced composure of a man who had sat across from people in negotiating positions before and learned how to wear patience like a suit. Let me make sure I understand you, she said. You want a 10% preferential rate on all business you refer. In exchange for, implicitly, whatever has happened to my other accounts stopping. I'm offering you a business partnership, he said. That's all. What happens if I say no? He didn't answer right away. He let the silence do what silence does. I hope you won't, he said finally. I think this is the smart play for both of us. Madison uncrossed her arms. She walked to the counter, picked up a blank service intake form, and placed it on the surface between them. Here's my answer, she said. Carter Towing operates on a flat rate structure for all clients. Ease. No preferential billing. No volume discounts based on referral relationships rather than actual volume thresholds that any client can achieve. She kept her voice the same temperature it had been from the beginning of the conversation. Ease. If Whitmore Gym has legitimate service needs, they're welcome to open an account and receive exactly the same quality of service every other client receives at exactly the same rates. Logan stared at her. Ease. That's it, he said. That's it. Something moved through his face, not rage. Ease. But its colder cousin. The kind of expression that meant the gloves were coming off and he was no longer going to bother pretending they weren't. Ease. He stood up slowly. You've got a very short memory, he said. Ease. Small businesses that rely on community goodwill don't survive when that goodwill dries up. Some don't, she agreed. Ease. The ones that do are the ones with a reputation that's impossible to manufacture. Ease. The kind you build by being straight with every customer every single time. Ease for years, until it's structural. He looked at her. Ease. She looked back. You're going to regret this, he said. Ease. Maybe, she said. Is there anything else I can help you with today? He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Ease. Then he walked out. She watched him go. She heard the truck engine start. Ease. She heard him pull out of the lot. Danny appeared in the bay doorway with the expression of someone who had been listening carefully to everything and was holding a very specific set of feelings about what he'd heard. Ease. He came here to offer you a deal, Danny said. He came here to offer me a way to surrender that would let him feel like he'd won a negotiation instead of a fight, she said. Ease. They're not the same thing. He said you'd regret it. He'll try to make sure of it. She went back to the bay. Ease. Get the Henderson, I mean. Earl's brake job written up. Ease. Customers coming at 2. She caught herself. Henderson was no longer a customer. Ease. She'd started to say their name out of habit, out of the muscle memory of a routing that had existed for 4 years and now didn't anymore. Ease. That small slip, more than anything Logan Whitmore had said in that room, ease was the thing that made the anger finally arrive. Not hot anger. Ease. Not the explosive kind. The cold, slow kind that sits in your sternum and fuels you for weeks. Ease. She let it in. She made room for it. She'd needed it before. Ease. That kind of anger. In other places and other circumstances. Ease. And she knew what to do with it. She put her hands back on the work. Ease. The next week, 2 things happened simultaneously. Ease. And together, they changed the shape of everything. Ease. The first was that someone keyed Danny's personal truck. Ease. He found it on Wednesday morning in the parking lot of the Sunrise Diner. Ease. Where he'd stopped for breakfast before his shift. Ease. A long scratch down the driver's side, rough and deliberate. Ease. The kind that takes time and intention and a specific kind of small cruelty. Ease. There was no note. There was no witness. Danny stood in that parking lot for a long time. Ease. And when he came to work that morning, he said nothing about it for 40 minutes until Madison noticed he was quieter than usual. Ease. What happened? She said. He told her. She kept her face still. Ease. Did you report it to who? It's a scratch on a truck. Ease. Nobody saw anything. You file a report anyway. You document everything. Ease. Danny. I told you that. She paused. Is the truck drivable? Then file the report. Ease. Today. Reference number, officer name, the whole thing. Ease. You write down every detail you can remember, exactly when you found it. Ease. Exactly what you saw. You put that paper in my folder. He looked at her. Ease. This is because of Whitmore. I can't prove that, Madison. I know, she said quietly. Ease. File the report. The second thing that happened that week was a conversation she overheard in the hardware store on Thursday afternoon. Ease. In the plumbing aisle, between 2 men she knew only slightly. One of them worked at the county office. Ease. The other she thought was a contractor of some kind. Ease. She came around the corner with a fistful of pipe fittings and heard her own name before they knew she was there. Ease. Carter woman's got a reputation, apparently, not just the tow business. What kind of reputation? Whitmore's kid was telling people she's got a past. Ease. Something from before she came back here to run the shop. Something to do with a rough crowd. Madison Carter. Ease. She's been here her whole life. She left for a while. Ease. Didn't she? After her dad got sick the first time. Ease. Years back. Nobody really knew where she went. A pause. Ease. What kind of crowd are we talking about? Madison came around the corner before the answer came. Both men went quiet. She nodded at them, moved down the aisle, and took her fittings to the register. Her hands were completely steady. Her face gave nothing away, but inside her chest, something shifted. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. Logan had found the one thread she hadn't expected him to pull. Because Madison Carter had left Silver Creek for 6 years in her late 20s. She had gone, and she had lived a different life, and she had come back changed in ways that most people in this town had attributed simply to growing up. Her father had known. He had been the only one who had known all of it. And he had loved her without reservation. And he had made her promise, made her swear on the last good day they'd had together before his decline that she would let it stay buried. She had kept that promise. She had kept it for 4 years. But Logan Whitmore had started to dig. She drove back to the shop with her jaw set and her mind moving through every possible angle with a speed and clarity that most people would have found startling in a woman who appeared to be simply driving a service truck through a Montana afternoon. He wanted to shake her. He thought her past was a weapon. He had no idea, none at all, what he was actually reaching for. She waited until Danny went home that evening. She locked the front door. She went to her desk. She opened the bottom drawer. She took out the lockbox. This time she opened it. Inside was a photograph, a folded piece of paper, a patch, a single diamond-shaped piece of embroidered leather, old and worn at the edges, deep burgundy with gold thread, and a cell phone that was not her regular phone. The battery was dead and had been for over a year. She held the patch for a moment. She thought about the promise she'd made her father. Then she put the patch back in the box. She put the photograph back. She put the folded paper back. She kept the phone out. She plugged it into a charger she'd kept coiled in the same drawer as if she'd always known the day would come when she needed it. She sat at her desk and she waited for the screen to light up. She wasn't ready to use it yet. She needed to be sure, absolutely sure, that she had exhausted everything else. Every legal avenue. Every documentable complaint. Every legitimate channel. Because the moment she made that call, she was no longer just a tow shop owner in a dispute with a local bully. She was something else, something she hadn't been in a very long time. The phone screen flickered, the battery icon appeared. 5% charge and climbing. She looked at it for a moment. She thought about her father's voice. His hands, mechanic's hands like hers. Rough and capable. The way he'd looked at her when she'd finally told him the truth, not with shame, not with horror, but with a long, quiet look that she hadn't been able to decode until he spoke. I always knew you were more than this town could hold. He'd said. I just needed to know you'd come back. She'd come back. She'd stayed. She'd built something real and straight and honest out of the name he'd spent his life making trustworthy. She was not going to let Logan Whitmore take it, but she was going to give the right channels one more chance first. She plugged the charger into the wall, left the phone on the desk, and went back to the bay. She had a brake job to finish. She had a service schedule to maintain. She had a shop to keep running for as long as she could on her own terms. Because that was what her father had built, and that was what she was going to honor. She picked up her tools. Outside, Silver Creek had gone quiet in the way of small towns after dark, that specific. Deep Montana quiet, where you could hear the wind working through the fields and the distant sound of a radio somewhere on the highway. Inside the bay, Madison Carter worked by the light of her overhead fluorescence and thought about every decision she'd made in the last 2 weeks and every decision she was going to have to make next. And she felt the weight of the lockbox on the desk, behind her like a hand on her shoulder. Patient, ready, waiting. She'd feel it there all night. And by morning, Logan Whitmore would take one more step, the one that would finally make the decision for her. The step Logan took the next morning was not dramatic. That was almost the worst part of it. It was a post. A single social media post on the Silver Creek Community Board, which was a public Facebook group with just under 3,000 members, nearly every adult in the county who used the internet. The post came from an account under the name of a woman called Cheryl Voss, who Danny didn't recognize and Madison had never heard of. It was written in the concerned, careful tone of someone who genuinely wanted to look out for the community. He's just heard some troubling things about Carter towing from a few people around town. Apparently there are some questions about the owner's background not from here, originally, and some history involving people you wouldn't want near your family. Probably nothing, but thought people should know before they call them for help on the side of the road. Please do your research. That was all. No names, no specifics. No accusation that could be disproven. Just the particular poison of vague implication. Planted in a public space where 3,000 people would see it over their morning coffee before anyone thought to report it or take it down. Danny saw it at 7:12 in the morning and called Madison before she'd finished her first cup. Don't read the comments, he said immediately. She already was. She put the phone down after 60 seconds. She stood in her kitchen and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth 3 times a thing she'd learned to do a long time ago when the world required her to respond instead of react. Then she called the Facebook group administrator, a retired school teacher named Gloria Haynes, who was mortified and took the post down within 20 minutes. But 20 minutes on a community board at 7 in the morning in a town of 4,000 people was more than enough. The screenshot was already circulating in private messages. The conversation was already seated. She drove to the shop. She opened the bay. She turned on the radio. At 8:15, Earl Hutchins came by not for a job, just to come by. He was 71 years old and had been her father's friend for decades, and he brought a paper bag from the diner with 2 coffees and a couple of breakfast sandwiches and set them on the workbench without saying anything about why he'd come. They drank their coffee. He asked about the brake job he'd had done last week. She said the pads were wearing right. Then he said, that post this morning. It's down, she said. I know it's down. I also know half the town saw it. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. People who know you know it's garbage. I want you to know that. I do know that, she said. Thank you, Earl. He looked at her for a moment with the particular look of an old man who knew more than he was saying. Your dad was the most honest man I ever knew in business, he said. You're his. She held that. She didn't trust her voice for a moment. Yeah, she said, I try to be. He nodded. He finished his coffee. He left. She stood in the bay alone for a full minute and let herself feel the weight of it, not the anger. Not the calculation, just the plain human exhaustion of being attacked by someone who had decided she was an obstacle rather than a person. Then she went to the desk. She picked up the old phone. The battery was at 62% now. She looked at it for a long time. She made a decision. Not the whole decision, not yet. But a part of it, a direction. She opened the contact list on the phone. There were 12 names in it. She scrolled slowly. Looking at each one the way you look at a door you haven't opened in years. Wondering what's still on the other side. She stopped on one name, Vic. She didn't dial yet. She put the phone down. She went to her filing cabinet and she pulled out every piece of documentation she had, the cancellation calls. The county notice, the police report from Danny's truck. The screenshot of the Facebook post that she'd taken before it came down. Her own handwritten timeline, and she laid them all out on the desk. She looked at the full picture for the first time. 14 days, 4 accounts disrupted, 1 employee's personal property damage. 1 public smear attempt with deliberate ambiguity designed to be untraceable. A business proposal designed to look like a solution while actually functioning as a demand for surrender. Logan Whitmore had not done any of this impulsively. He was organized, he was patient, and he was getting bolder with each move, which meant the escalation wasn't finished. She picked up the regular phone and called the county's small business advocacy office. She explained the situation in full, with dates and documentation, referencing the formal complaint process under the county's contractor fairness standards. The woman on the other end was professional and clearly uncomfortable. She took detailed notes. She said someone would call back within 3 to 5 business days. Madison thanked her and hung up. 3 to 5 business days. She looked at the old phone. She looked at the name Vic. She put the old phone in her jacket pocket and went back to work. Wednesday came in cold and overcast, and it brought Danny into the office looking like he hadn't slept, which was unusual, because Danny Reyes had the easy conscience of someone who'd never done anything that kept him up at night. What, she said. He put his own phone on her desk and pointed at the screen. It was a text message. Unknown number. Short. You should find somewhere else to work. This shop's going to be a memory in 60 days. Madison read it twice. When did this come in? Last night. 2 in the morning. And you didn't sleep? Not really. No, she turned the phone over so the screen faced the desk. 2 in the morning is a man who isn't sleeping great either, she said. People who are winning don't send texts at 2 in the morning. That's not the comforting observation you think it is. It's not meant to be comforting. It's meant to be accurate. She slid the phone back to him. Screenshot it, send it to me. File a report. Madison, this he stopped. Started again, I'm 22. I work at a tow shop. I didn't sign up to get threatening texts in the middle of the night. I know. She looked at him directly. And I'm sorry. That's genuine, I am sorry that this is touching you. I never wanted that. He looked at the floor. He was quiet for a moment. Are you going to do something? Yes. When? When I've done everything I can through the right channels first. She paused. There's a process, Danny. You skip the process and you give them ammunition. He looked up at her. Who's them? She held his gaze. I need you to trust me for a little while longer. He didn't look entirely satisfied. But he nodded. And he went back to work. And she watched him go and made herself a promise privately. The kind you make to yourself in the chest, rather than out loud, that she would not let this drag on long enough to cost him anything more than sleep. Thursday afternoon, the call came in from a man named Peter Gaines, who was a reporter for the Silver Creek Courier, the county's weekly paper. He wanted to do a story on Carter Towing specifically, he said, on the recent questions in the community about the shop's ownership and background. What questions are those? She said. There's been some discussion, he said carefully. Regarding your personal background, whether your business history and associations are consistent with someone holding municipal contracts. Who's feeding you that story? Peter? A pause. He was young, she could hear it. Fresh enough that he didn't completely know how to pretend he wasn't uncomfortable with the call. I've received information from multiple sources. Logan Whitmore is one of them. Silence. Peter, she said. I've held the County Road Services contract for 3 years with a perfect service record. I have never received a complaint, formal or informal, about the quality or integrity of our work. Everything you're hearing is sourced from a man who is conducting a pressure campaign against my business because I refuse to give him preferential billing. She kept her voice measured and clear. If you want to report on that story, on a man leveraging his father's community relationships to coerce a small business owner, I will sit down with you with full documentation. Another silence. Longer. That's a significant claim, he said. Everything I just said is documented. Dates, names, recorded phone lines. She paused. What's your deadline? Friday noon. I can meet you tomorrow morning at 9. He said he'd call her back. He called back 40 minutes later and confirmed the meeting. She wrote the appointment in her calendar. She assembled the document folder in a separate copy timeline. Call, county noted, report, screenshot, and put a rubber band around it for Peter Gaines. Then she sat back in her chair and thought very carefully about what came next. She was not naive enough to think the newspaper story would stop Logan Whitmore. Men like him had multiple fronts, and closing one just pushed the pressure somewhere else. The county complaint process moved in bureaucratic time. The newspaper could help with public perception, but perception didn't pay the shortfall in the monthly accounts. She needed to think about this differently. She'd been fighting defensively, documenting, responding, enduring. That was right for the early stages. It was how you built a record. But defensive posture had a limit. And she was approaching it. She needed to shift, not to aggression. She wasn't going to become the kind of person who fought dirty because someone else had. But there was a third option, something between absorbing blows and throwing them back. She needed to make Logan Whitmore understand exactly what he was dealing with. Not what she could do to him, what she was. She picked up the old phone and dialed. It rang 4 times, then a voice low, unhurried. The kind of voice that came from a man who had never in his adult life been in a genuine hurry because he didn't need to be. Well, the voice said, I wondered when this would happen. Vic, she said. Maddie. He said her name the way only about 6 people in the world had ever said it with the full weight of knowing. You okay? I'm functional. That's not what I asked. I know. She turned the old phone in her hand. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without deciding anything until I'm done. When have I ever not listened? You want a list? He laughed a short, genuine sound that made something in her chest loosen slightly. All right. Tell me, she told him. All of it. From the Route 9 call to Facebook post to Danny's truck to the 2 in the morning text. She talked for 12 minutes without interruption. Laying it out in the same ordered, factual way she laid out everything. Because that was how her mind worked, and Vic had always understood that about her. When she finished, there was a silence. What do you want from me, he said. Nothing yet, she said. I want you to know. I want someone who understands the full picture to know. In case she stopped. In case what? In case it escalates to something that requires a different kind of response. Vic was quiet for a moment. You haven't lost your instincts. No, this man has no idea who you are. That's correct. You want me to wait. For now. Yes. Another pause. She could hear him breathing. She could hear faint. In the background, the sound of motorcycles idling somewhere distant. She hadn't heard that sound in a long time, and it went straight through her in a way she didn't quite have a name for. Not nostalgia, not regret. Something older than either. Maddie, Vic said. You know, all you have to do is say it. I know, she said. That's not where we are yet, but we're closer than you were last year. Yes, she said honestly. We're closer. Then keep me on the line, he said. Figuratively, I will. And Maddie, his voice shifted. Just slightly. Gerald would be proud of how you're handling this. She didn't answer for a moment. The mention of her father's name from someone who had actually known him had sat in this shop. Had shaken his hand. Had understood without needing. It explained that the woman Gerald Carter raised was capable of that would have surprised everyone who knew her only from this side of the county line, did something to her that she hadn't fully prepared for. Thank you, she said. Her voice was even. I'll be in touch, she hung up. She put the phone down. She sat in the quiet of her office with the hum of the fluorescents overhead and the sound of Danny in the bay and the distant truth that she had just restarted something that had been dormant for 4 years. She was not afraid of it. That was the honest answer to the question nobody was asking her. She was not afraid of who she'd been or what that version of her had meant. She had made peace with all of it a long time ago. In stages, the way you make peace with anything true about yourself. She was only afraid of the collateral damage of what returning to that world, even briefly, even from a distance, might cost her and Danny and the thing her father had been. But Logan Whitmore had taken that particular choice out of her hands with a Facebook post and a 2 in the morning text to a 22-year-old who didn't deserve to lose sleep over any of it. Some decisions make themselves. Friday morning, Peter Gaines sat across from her at the small table in the customer waiting area. And he was younger than she'd expected, 25 maybe. With a new reporter's notebook and the careful attention of someone who knew this meeting mattered. She put the document folder on the table. She talked for 40 minutes. She did not raise her voice. She did not make accusations she couldn't support. She walked him through the documented timeline with the precision of someone who had always understood that the most powerful argument is the one that doesn't need emotion to be convincing. Peter Gaines stopped writing at several points and just listened. When she finished, he looked at the documents and then at her and said, why haven't you gone to the police? The police require direct evidence of criminal behavior. What's been done to me is carefully designed to stay inside legal ambiguity. That's not an accident. She paused. That tells you something about the person doing it. What does it tell you? That he's done this before, she said. He's. Or he's watched someone do it. Peter wrote that down. He's. What do you want from the article? I want the community to see the documented record, she said. He's not my version of events, the records themselves. He's dates, times, direct quotes from the calls where I recorded them. He's the county notice, the police report. She folded her hands on the table. He's. I'm not asking you to write an opinion piece. I'm asking you to report what's in front of you. He looked at her steadily. He's. Miss Carter, off the record, this is going to create significant conflict for your business. He's. More attention means more sides engaging. I know. And you want to proceed anyway. I've been proceeding quietly for 2 weeks, she said. It hasn't helped. She held his gaze. Sometimes you have to stop absorbing and make the thing visible. He nodded slowly. He closed his notebook. I'll have something for review before we publish. I'll need a comment from Logan Whitmore's side. That's your job, she said. Do it right. He smiled briefly. It was the smile of someone who'd just been talked to by an adult in the clearest possible terms and found it unexpectedly refreshing. She walked him out. She watched him go. She went back inside. Danny was standing in the bay doorway. How'd it go? We'll see, she said. What's on the schedule? 2 calls this morning. 1 this afternoon, and he hesitated. What? There's a man outside who wants to talk to you. He came in while you were with the reporter. Said he's a friend of yours. Danny's expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read. He's not from around here. She went still. What does he look like? Big. Older. Gray at the temples. Black jacket. Danny paused. He came on a motorcycle. And he's not alone. Madison walked to the window that looked out into the lot. He's standing beside a road-worn Harley-Davidson, hands in his jacket pockets. He's waiting with the particular patience of a man who had never needed to perform urgency because his presence alone was sufficient, was a man she recognized immediately from 40 feet and 4 years of distance. It wasn't Vic. Vic had sent someone ahead. Someone she knew even better. His name was Cole, and he had been her father's friend before he'd been anything else. And he had watched her grow up, and he had watched her leave Silver Creek at 27. And he had been the one standing at the edge of the group when she'd earned the right to stand at its center. And he had been the one who'd said, when she finally left that life to come home, the door doesn't close. Maddie. It just waits. She hadn't seen him in 4 years. He looked exactly the same. She opened the front door and walked out into the lot. Cole turned. He looked at her with the same slow reading assessment. He'd always had the look of a man who was checking not whether you were okay, but whether you were true. Cole, she said. Vic called, he said. Told me what's been going on. He didn't move closer yet. He stood in the lot and let her come to the distance she was comfortable with. Because that was the kind of man. He was the kind who understood that respect was a spatial language as much as a verbal one. We're not here to cause problems. She looked past him. There were 3 other motorcycles parked in a row. 3 other men. Sitting on their bikes. Not moving. Not speaking, just present. I know you're not, she said. You should have called sooner. I handled it myself as long as I could. He nodded. That was answer enough for him. What do you need? She looked at him. This man who had known her father, who had known her at her most honest and her most complicated, who had never asked her to be anything other than exactly what she was. I need Logan Whitmore to understand what he's dealing with, she said. Not what I'll do to him. What I am. Cole considered that. There's a difference, yes, she said. There is. And I need it done in a way that doesn't give him anything to bring to a lawyer. Understood, Cole. She waited until his eyes met hers. I'm not going back. I want you to know that. Whatever happens here, I'm not coming back. He held her gaze. Nobody's asking you to, he said. You built something honest here. Maddie. Gerald would have hated having anything else said about it. He glanced back at the 3 men behind him. We're just here to stand in a parking lot for a while. That's all. She almost smiled. Not quite. You hungry? We wouldn't say no to coffee. She went inside and put the coffee on and stood in her kitchen for a moment with her hands on the counter and her eyes on the window that showed the lot, ease, where Cole stood beside his motorcycle with the quiet authority of a man who had always understood that power didn't need to be loud to be real. Ease. She thought about Logan Whitmore getting in his truck this morning. Ease. Driving through Silver Creek, thinking about his next move. Ease. Thinking she was running out of time and options. She thought about what his face was going to look like when he came to deliver that next move, and found that the tow shop on the eastern edge of town was no longer undefended, not by force. He's not by threat, but by something he hadn't calculated for. His history, hers. The coffee finished brewing. She poured 4 cups. Ease. She carried them out to the lot on a tray that had been her father's. Ease. Old wood and slightly warped, with the Carter Towing logo burned into the corner in letters he'd done himself with a wood burner when he was building the brand. Ease. Cole took his cup. He looked at the logo. He said nothing. Ease. She stood beside him in the lot, and they drank their coffee in the Montana morning. Ease. And the 3 men behind them drank theirs. And Danny watched from the bay doorway with the expression of someone recalibrating everything he thought he knew about his employer. Ease. After a while, Cole said, Vic says this man's father is well liked. He is, she said. Ease. That complicate things for you? Some. Not the core of it. She turned her cup in her hands. Ease. Ray Whitmore is a good man. He doesn't know what his son has been doing. Ease. That matters. Cole looked at her sideways. You're thinking about him too. I'm thinking about all of it, she said. Ease. That's why I waited. He drank his coffee. What happens when Whitmore finds out we're here? He'll come, she said. He won't be able to help it. Men like that need to confront what they don't control. She paused. Ease. When he does, I want to be the one who talks. Nobody else. It's just me. That's your call. Cole's yes, she said. It is. She set her cup down on the tray. She straightened her jacket. Ease. She looked at the road that ran past the shop toward the center of Silver Creek. Ease. Toward the gym on the corner of Elk and 2nd, with the plaque on the wall and the good father's name above the door. Ease. She thought about how things break and how things hold. Ease. And about the difference between a man who builds something and a man who inherits it. Ease. And about what it costs to walk away from a life that had loved you and build a different one from scratch, using nothing but your father's name and your own 2 hands. Ease. She thought about what it felt like to stand in your own lot with the people who knew your truest self and feel. Ease. For the first time in 2 weeks, completely unafraid. Ease. Logan Whitmore was going to come. She was ready. She had always been ready. Ease. She just hadn't needed to show it until now. Word traveled fast in Silver Creek. Ease. It always had. 4,000 people and 1 main street meant that information moved, the way water moved through flat ground quietly. Ease. Without announcement, finding every low place before anyone noticed it was spreading. Ease. By noon on Friday, the fact that 4 motorcycles were parked in the lot of Carter Towing had passed through the diner, Ease, the hardware store, the pharmacy, and the waiting room of the county road office in the form of text messages and 2 phone calls and 1 conversation between neighbors across a fence line. Ease. By 2 in the afternoon, Logan Whitmore knew. He found out the way he found out most things in Silver Creek through his phone. Ease, which buzzed with a message from a contact whose name Madison would have recognized if she'd seen it. Ease. Because small towns had layers, and Logan had spent 18 months learning which layer of Silver Creek's social fabric was load-bearing. Ease. The message said only, you should probably go see what's happening at Carter Towing. Ease. He drove past without stopping first. That was characteristic of him he needed to assess before he committed. Ease. Which was a useful instinct in commercial real estate, and a liability when the thing you were assessing was a situation that had already moved past the point where assessment was the relevant skill. Ease. He saw Cole's motorcycle. He saw the 3 others. Ease. He saw Cole himself, standing in the lot talking to Madison, with the easy posture of a man who belonged exactly where he was. Ease. He drove another 2 blocks, pulled into a side street, Ease, and sat for several minutes. Then he called Frank Delaney. Ease. What do you know about bikers in Silver Creek, he said. Ease. Frank's voice went careful immediately. Nothing. Why? There are 4 motorcycles at Carter Towing. Ease. Men I don't recognize. A pause. Logan. I need to be clear about something. Please. What I did with the contract review that was a professional favor. Please, one time. I'm not asking you to do anything, Logan said quickly. Please, I just want information. I don't have any. Another pause. Please, and this one carried a different quality. A pulling back quality. Please, I think maybe this is getting complicated in a way I'm not comfortable with. Frank, I'll call you next week. He hung up. Please. Logan put the phone down. He looked at the steering wheel for a moment. Please. He was a man who had grown up watching his father solve problems through presence, through walking into a room and being Ray Whitmore. Please, which was usually enough. He had inherited the instinct but not quite the substance. Please. And moments like this one made the gap between those two things uncomfortably clear. Please. He called his father. He didn't mean to. He'd been avoiding that call for 3 weeks. Please. Which took effort because Ray called him twice a week. And Logan had been managing those calls with the careful vagueness of a son who didn't want his father to know what he'd been doing. Please. But right now, in a side street, 2 blocks from a tow shop, where something had shifted in a direction he hadn't predicted, please. He hit the contact and held the phone to his ear. Ray Whitmore answered on the second ring. Please. Hey, son. Hey, Dad. He stopped. How are you feeling today? Good. Good day. Went to the gym for an hour this morning. A pause. Please. You sound tight. I'm fine. Just work stuff. You sure? Please. Because you've sounded off for a few weeks. What's going on? Logan looked out the windshield at nothing. Please, nothing I can't handle. Ray was quiet for a moment. Please. It was the silence of a man who had spent decades in a gym reading other men's bodies and had learned to read voices with the same precision. Please. Son, whatever you've got yourself into, it's easier to get out of it early. Logan felt something move through his chest that he didn't have a clean name for. Please. I'll handle it, Dad. Okay, Ray said, in the tone of a man who was not okay with that answer, but who knew his child well enough to know when pushing would just close the door. Please, come for dinner this weekend. Yeah, I will. He hung up. Please. He drove back to the shop. He pulled in at 2:37 and got out of the truck before he'd fully committed to a plan. Which was already a departure from how he usually operated. Cole watched him from across the lot without moving. Without speaking, without doing anything at all, except existing in a way that communicated quietly, thoroughly, and without a single word that he was not someone who could be managed by the same tools Logan had been using on Frank Delaney and Ron Bassett. Madison came out of the shop before Logan reached the door. She came out deliberately, stepping into the lot rather than waiting inside. Which meant she was controlling the geography of the conversation, and Logan was already reacting to her rather than the other way around. She had her work jacket on. Her hands were clean, she'd washed them before coming out. Which meant she'd had enough notice to compose herself. Which meant she'd been watching for him. Logan, she said. We need to talk, he said. We're talking. He looked past her at Cole, who had not moved, then at the 3 other men behind Cole. His jaw worked for a moment. Inside, he said. This is fine, she said. What did you want to say? He looked at her. He'd come here with something, an argument. A position, a version of the conversation he'd run in his head on the 2-block drive. Looking at her now, with Cole's eyes on his back, and the lot spread out around them, and the afternoon light, the same as it always was. He found the script harder to access. Who are these people? He said. Friends, she said simply. What kind of friends? Old ones. She kept her voice the same temperature it always was, level. He's direct, unhurried. Did you drive over to ask me about my friends? Logan, or was there something else? His jaw tight. I saw the interview request from the courier. She said nothing. Peter Gaines called my office this morning looking for a comment. He held her gaze. You talked to a reporter. I did, about me. About documented events, she said. With documented evidence. The reporter asked for comment from both sides. That's how journalism works. That's how you're going to play this, he said. It came out with an edge she hadn't heard from him before, not the smooth condescension of their first meeting. Not the cold warning of his visit to the shop, but something rawer. Something that came from a man who had expected to be further ahead by now and was recalibrating under pressure. You're going to make a public thing out of this. You made it public when someone posted on the community board about my personal background. She kept her eyes on his. Please. You started the public conversation, Logan. I'm just making sure both sides of it are documented. He shifted his weight. Please. Behind her, she heard Cole move not toward them. Please. Not doing anything threatening, simply adjusting his position. He's the way a man does when he wants to be slightly more present in a space. Please. Logan's eyes went to Cole and came back. Those men aren't from here, Logan said. No, she agreed. Where are they from? She looked at him for a moment. She thought about how much of the truth to give him. And she made a choice that she'd been working toward all morning, not to hide it. Not to weaponize it, but to simply say it plainly and let him do the arithmetic. You've been telling people in this town that I have a past, she said. That I was involved with people they wouldn't want near their families. She paused. You weren't wrong. Logan blinked. 6 years, she said. Between 27 and 33. I left Silver Creek, and I lived a different life, and I came back and built this place, and I have not once been anything other than straight with this town, or with my customers, or with the county that contracted me. She held his gaze without flinching. But you were correct that I know people who aren't from here. People who have known me a long time. People who, she stopped, chose the word carefully, have a particular way of being present. Logan looked at Cole again. Cole met his eyes with an expression that communicated nothing negative and nothing positive. Just an absolute settled certainty that was its own kind of statement. Hell's Angels, Logan said. It wasn't quite a question. Madison didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. She said, I called a friend. My friend came. He brought some people he trusts. She kept everything in her voice quiet and clean. Nobody here is going to hurt you, Logan. Nobody here is going to threaten you. That is not what this is. Then what is it? It's me, she said. Telling you that I am not without resources, that the woman you've been pressuring for 2 weeks is not who you thought she was. And that the things you've been doing, the calls to my accounts, the text to my employee, the post on the community board have all been documented and reported through proper channels. And the courier story is going to run next week with every piece of that documentation in it. The blood drained from Logan's face in stages. The way color leaves something slowly rather than all at once. She watched it happen and felt nothing triumphant about it, just the tired, precise satisfaction of a person who has done a difficult thing correctly. You have a choice, she said, same as you've always had. You can keep going, keep making calls, keep applying pressure. See what happens when a story runs in the county paper with your name in it alongside Ron Bassett's and Frank Delaney's and Patricia Eldridge's. She paused. Or you can stop, and we can talk about what it looks like to actually make this right. Logan stared at her. His hands were at his sides, and he wasn't moving. And she could see him working through something internally, the particular stillness of a man whose plan has collapsed and who hasn't yet found the shape of the next thing. You'd go to the paper, he said, even if it hurts your business. Even if it makes things worse for you short term. Yes, she said. Because short term is not what I'm building for. He looked away. Looked at the ground, looked at Cole, and this time when his eyes went to Cole, there was something different in them. Not fear exactly. Something more complicated. The look of a man encountering, for the first time, evidence that the world contains people whose metrics of power are completely different from the ones he grew up measuring. Cole looked back at him and did not speak. My father, Logan said finally. His voice had dropped. He doesn't know any of this. I assumed that, Madison said. If this goes in the paper, then he'll know, she said. Same as everyone else. She let that sit. That's on you. Logan, not on me. He put his hand over his mouth briefly. A private gesture that she'd never seen from him before, nothing calculated about it. Nothing performed. Just a man touching his face because he needed a second to exist in a reality he hadn't prepared for. What do you want, he said. His voice was quiet now. The smoothness was gone. I want what was taken from me put back, she said. Henderson Logistics, Patricia Eldridge. The county contract review resolved in my favor. He's in writing, with a clear record that it was improperly initiated. She paused. Please. And I want an apology to Danny Reyes for the damage to his truck and for the text message. How would you even... I can't prove the text came from you, she said. Please. But I know it did, and you know it did. And that's between us. Please. The apology is not optional. He looked at her for a long time. Please. The afternoon was very quiet. Somewhere on the main road, a truck went past. Please. And the sound of it faded, and the quiet came back. Please. And if I do those things, he said. The paper story. I'm not going to kill the story, she said. Please. That's not mine to give you. Peter Gaines is a reporter, and he'll write what's documented. She paused. Please. But there's a difference between a story about a man who harmed a small business and refused to take responsibility. Please. And a story about a man who made mistakes, recognized them, please, and made them right. People in this town know your father. Please. They want to be able to reconcile what they're going to read with what they know about your family. She kept her eyes on his. Please. Give them something to reconcile. The word father hit Logan in a way that was visible on his face. Please. Not pain exactly, something more like the specific ache of someone who has been carrying the weight of a name and has finally, in this moment, felt it as a burden rather than a gift. Please. He worked 30 years for that reputation, Logan said. Please. It sounded like something he'd been holding for a while. Please. I know, she said. So did my dad. That landed. Please. She saw it land, the sudden clear recognition that they were, in fact, in the same story, except that one of them had protected what their father built, and one of them had tried to use it as a crowbar. Logan turned and walked back to his truck. He got in. He sat there for a moment without starting the engine. Then he got back out. He walked not toward Madison, but toward Cole. Cole watched him come without expression. Logan stopped 3 feet away. He looked at Cole the way a man looks at someone when he's deciding to say something honest and is uncertain whether he's capable of it. I didn't know about her, Logan said. I thought she was... He stopped. I made a wrong read. Cole looked at him for a long moment. Most men who come up against Maddie make a wrong read, he said. The ones who matter are the ones who figure out how to make it right once they know. Logan held Cole's gaze. Then he nodded once. A small, private motion. And walked back to his truck and drove away. The lot was quiet. Danny came out of the bay doorway and stood beside Madison. He'd heard enough, she could tell from his face that he'd heard most of it. Is it over? He said. The first part, she said. Ray Whitmore called her that evening. She was in the office doing the end-of-week billing when the regular phone rang and the name on the screen made her stop moving for a full second. She answered it. Madison. Ray's voice was different from his son's, deeper. Slower, with the particular grain of a man who had taken more than a few hits in his life and built his character around absorbing them rather than avoiding them. I think we need to talk. Am I calling at a bad time? No, she said. It's fine. Logan called me. A pause. He told me what he'd been doing. Not everything, I think, but enough. Another pause. I owe you an apology. She kept her voice even. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. He said it plainly. Without ceremony. That boy's been using my relationships in this town to do things I would never have sanctioned. Business I've built over 30 years. People I care about used as leverage against a woman who's done nothing but run an honest shop. She could hear him breathe in and out slowly. Gerald Carter was a man I respected. This town owes his daughter better than what she got this month. The mention of her father's name from Ray Whitmore's mouth did something that Cole's mention of it hadn't quite done. It hit a different register. A public one. The register of a man who had known Gerald Carter in the community rather than in confidence. Thank you, she said, and meant it. I'm going to make calls tomorrow morning, Ray said. Henderson, Patricia Eldridge, Ron Bassett. I'll make clear that whatever pressure was applied through my name was unauthorized and that their relationships with Carter Towing should return to normal. He paused. That's the least I can do. Ray, let me finish. His voice was gentle but firm, a father's voice. She thought, not just toward his son, but in a more general sense. The voice of someone who had spent decades helping people become better versions of themselves. Logan is not a bad person. He grew up watching people treat my name like it meant something. And somewhere along the way, he confused the name with the character. That's my failure as a parent, not just his as a man. A long pause. But he's going to fix this. He gave me his word. She turned her pen over and over in her hand. Did you ask him about the Facebook post? A silence. He told me about that too. And Danny's truck. Yes, Ray's voice tightened almost imperceptibly. That one he stopped. That one he's going to have to look that young man in the eye and account for. Yes, she said. He is. They talked for a few more minutes about Gerald. Briefly, about the shop, about the county contract review, and what Ray thought it would take to resolve it through his contacts on the advisory board. He was methodical and honest, and she could hear the effort it was costing him. Not the effort of humility exactly, but the particular effort of a proud man who loves his son and is reckoning with what that love had failed to prevent. Before he hung up, he said, "The men at your shop today." Cole and the others. She waited. Logan said they were. He paused. He said they were Hell's Angels. Cole is an old friend, she said. He came because I called someone who passed the word. Another pause. Is that part of your past? What people have been saying? She could have deflected it. She could have given him the minimum. Instead, she said, yes. 6 years of it. I was young and I made choices that suited who I was at the time. I left when I was ready to come home. She kept her voice quiet and steady. I'm not ashamed of those years, but I'm not that person anymore either. I'm Gerald Carter's daughter running his shop, and that's the truest thing about me. Ray was silent for a moment. Gerald knew, he said. He knew everything, and he was proud of you anyway. He was proud of me because of it, she said. He said it made me stronger than most people he'd ever met. Ray made a sound, not a word. Just a small, low sound of someone absorbing something that matters. He was right, he said. Good night, Madison. Good night. Ray. She put the phone down. She sat for a while in the quiet of the office, with the billing half done in front of her, and the filing cabinet against the wall, and the framed note above the desk. Keep it honest, and it'll keep you, and she let the evening settle around her the way evenings do when the hard part of a day is genuinely finally over. Cole knocked on the office door at 7. He and the others were heading out long drive back. Early morning. He stood in the doorway the way he'd always stood in doorways. Comfortably, without crowding the room. You good? He said. Yeah, she said. I'm good. The old man called you? Ray Whitmore? Yeah. Cole nodded. That meant something to him, she could tell. So it's moving right. It's moving right. He looked at the framed note on the wall. He looked at it for a long time, long enough that she could tell he was reading it. Did Gerald write that? Week before he died. Cole was quiet. He's then good man. The best I ever knew, she said. He put his hand briefly on the door frame, not a touch exactly. More like grounding himself in the moment, acknowledging it without making it larger than it needed to be. That was Cole. He'd always known how to honor things without ceremony. Vic says you should call more often, he said. Tell Vic I'll call when I need to. That's what you always say. Because it's always true, he almost smiled. He pushed off the door frame and walked through the customer area and out into the lot. And she heard the motorcycles start up one by one, that low, rolling thunder that she had once gone to sleep to and woken up to and considered the background sound of her life. And then they pulled out of the lot and the sound diminished down Route 9 until it was gone. The shop was quiet. Danny was still in the bay he'd offered to finish the last vehicle on the schedule while she handled the paperwork. Which was the kind of thing he did without being asked that made her absolutely certain she'd hired the right person 3 years ago. She went to the bay doorway. He was under a truck. Visible only from the waist down, working with steady, unhurried efficiency. Danny, she said. Yeah? Logan Whitmore is going to come and speak to you. Probably early next week. A pause in the work. He rolled out from under the truck and looked at her. About the truck. And the text message. He sat up. He processed that for a moment, and I'm supposed to listen to him, she said. That's all. You don't have to forgive him. You don't have to make it easy for him. But listen, she held his gaze, and then decide what you think. Danny turned the wrench in his hand. He was thinking hard, she could see it in his face. The complicated arithmetic of being 22 and figuring out what it means to be the kind of person who decides rather than reacts. Okay, he said finally. Okay, she said. She went back to the billing. The Silver Creek Courier ran Peter Gaines's story the following Thursday. It was on the front page. Below the fold. Under the headline. Local tow business owner documents pressure campaign, questions raised about contractor review process. It was a good piece of journalism. Peter had done the work. He'd reached Logan for comment. He'd reached Ron Bassett. He'd talked to two other former clients of Carter Towing. He'd requested documentation from the county on the review timeline. The story did not call Logan Whitmore a villain. It presented the documented record and quoted sources and let the pattern speak for itself. The reaction in Silver Creek was swift in the way that small-town reactions are swift, not a single conversation, but 100 simultaneous ones. Running through the diner and the hardware store and the gym's front desk and the community Facebook group and the phone lines of people who had known Gerald Carter and people who had known Madison since she was a girl. And people who had known neither but who understood. Reading the documented timeline, exactly what kind of story they were looking at. By Friday morning, 3 people Madison had never spoken to had called the shop to say they were sending their vehicles in. By Friday afternoon, Henderson Logistics had called to say the contract review had been resolved and that they'd be resuming their standard service agreement at the beginning of the following week. Patricia Eldridge sent an email. It was short, professional, and careful in the way of someone who was not quite ready to say the name of what she'd participated in, but who was clear about the practical outcome. The account was reopening. She was sorry for the disruption. Ron Bassett called personally. He didn't hedge. I owe you a straightforward conversation, he said. I let myself be pushed in a direction I knew wasn't right. And I didn't push back the way I should have. The county review is closed. Your contract is reinstated. And I'm going to recommend at the next advisory meeting that the contractor standards be reviewed for vulnerability to this kind of informal pressure. He paused. I'm sorry, Madison. She accepted it without performing forgiveness. She wasn't entirely sure she felt yet. Thank you for calling, Ron. Your father would have handled this the same way you did, he said. That's not a small thing. She thanked him again and hung up. She sat in the office and looked at the ceiling and thought about the fact that she had come within about 6 weeks of losing everything her father built, and that the thing that had stopped it was not the newspaper story and not the restored accounts and not Cole's presence in the lot, though all of those had mattered. The thing that had stopped it was the record, the folder she'd started on the 4th day. When she'd written down Henderson's call in careful detail and labeled the folder with nothing but the date. Her father's instinct had taught her that. Document everything. Don't assume anyone will remember what happened. Make it so they don't have to rely on memory. She pulled the folder out of the drawer. She held it for a moment. Then she put it in the filing cabinet, not in the trash. But filed under W with a proper label. Because that was the kind of thing you kept. And it was also the kind of thing you hoped, with everything you had, you'd never need again. Logan Whitmore came to the shop on Monday morning at 9. He came alone in a different car, not the Sierra. Not the loaner. Something ordinary, a sedan she didn't recognize. He was wearing a plain jacket and no sunglasses pushed into his hair. He looked like he hadn't slept well for several days, which she suspected was true. He asked to speak to Danny first. She sent him to the bay. She didn't listen. She went to her desk and she did the billing she hadn't finished Friday, and she let the two of them have whatever conversation they needed to have without her in the room. Because this was Danny's thing to handle, and he was more than capable of handling it. 20 minutes later, Danny came through to the office. His face was hard to read, not angry, not relieved. Just the face of someone who has been through something and is deciding how to carry it. He apologized, Danny said. Good, he meant it. I think. He leaned against the doorframe. He searched for the word. He looked like his dad. Madison looked at him. Yeah? Not in a bad way. Just, Danny shrugged, the shrug of a 22-year-old who doesn't yet have the vocabulary for what he just witnessed but knows it was real. I told him it was okay. Was that wrong? No, she said. That's exactly right. Logan appeared in the doorway behind Danny, who stepped aside. Logan looked at Madison across the office. He had his hands in his jacket pockets, and he didn't try to straighten up or project anything, none of the performed composure of their previous encounters. He just stood in the doorway and looked at her as himself. Whatever that turned out to be. My father is going to speak to the advisory board on Wednesday, he said. He's about the county contract. He's doing it publicly on record. Not as a favor, as a correction. I know, she said. Logan nodded. The Henderson and Eldridge accounts are resolved, she said. They called Friday. He nodded again. He was quiet for a moment. He started again. I'm not going to make a speech about how I understand what I did wrong. I think you'd find that insulting. She waited. I underestimated you, he said. Every step. I looked at you and I saw a tow driver and I thought, he stopped. And I was wrong. And not just about who you know or what your past was. I was wrong about what kind of person you are. She held his gaze. She let the silence sit without filling it. My father built his reputation by respecting people, Logan said. I thought I'd inherited that from him. His jaw tightened very briefly. I apparently need to do the work he did, not just carry the name. She stood up from her desk. She crossed the office and held out her hand. He looked at it for a second, a brief, honest second of surprise, and then he shook it. His grip was firm. Was firmer. If Whitmore Gym has service needs, she said. You know where the shop is? He almost smiled. It was a real one, smaller than his performed ones. Less polished, entirely genuine. Yeah, he said. I do. He left. She stood in the middle of her office for a moment. Then she picked up her jacket, walked through the customer area, through the bay, and out the back door to the small patch of ground behind the shop where her father had planted 2 trees the year she was born, and where she sometimes went when she needed to stand outside without being visible from the road. She stood there for a while. She wasn't crying, that wasn't quite right. But there was something moving through her chest that needed space and air and the particular quiet of a place that had known her entire life. She thought about her father. She thought about what he would say if he could see this morning, not the apology. Not the restored accounts, not the newspaper story. But this exact moment, standing in the quiet behind the shop he'd built. After a fight she hadn't wanted and hadn't started and hadn't lost. She thought he would say exactly what he'd written on the card above her desk. She went back inside. She had work to do. The advisory board meeting was on a Wednesday. And Madison didn't go. She'd been invited. Peter Gaines had told her the meeting was open to the public. That several community members were planning to attend specifically because of the Courier story. That her presence would carry weight. She'd thanked him and said she had a service call at 10 and another at 2, and that she trusted the process to work without her standing in the room watching it. That wasn't entirely honest. The fuller truth was that she didn't want to sit in a room and watch Ray Whitmore publicly correct something his son had done. Because Ray Whitmore's dignity in that moment was going to cost him something real. And she didn't need to witness the cost to know it was being paid. Some things deserve privacy even when they happened in public spaces. She understood that from experience. She took the 10 o'clock call, a retired school teacher named Donna Marsh, whose alternator had given out on the highway, and she handled it herself rather than sending Danny. Because the morning was cold and Donna was 73 and Madison had known her since childhood. She drove out to the highway with the service truck and found Donna sitting in her car with the heat off to preserve the battery. Wrapped in a coat she'd grabbed from the back seat. Patient in the way of someone who had learned that most things eventually got fixed if you waited calmly enough. Madison Carter, Donna said when Madison knocked on the window. I heard about what happened with the Whitmore boy. Half the county heard, Madison said, pulling on her gloves. The right half. Donna watched her work. Your father would have done exactly what you did. Not one thing different. Madison kept her hands moving. Geez, people keep telling me that. Because it's true and it bears repeating. Donna paused. Geez, that's how things get remembered. Someone says the true thing enough times until it stops being news and starts being fact. Madison thought about that while she worked. Geez. She thought about how long she'd spent in Silver Creek, worrying about what people did or didn't know about her. Geez, carrying her 6 years away like a weight she needed to keep balanced, not ashamed of it. Geez, never quite ashamed, but careful with it, protective of it. Geez, managing the distance between who she was now and what she'd been. Geez, in case the gap confused people who didn't have the full picture. Geez, what she hadn't fully calculated was how little the gap mattered to the people who actually knew her. Geez, Earl Hutchins, Donna Marsh, Ron Bassett when he'd finally stopped being afraid and called her. Geez, Cole, who'd driven down from wherever he was living now without hesitation because a mutual friend had said her name. Geez, Ray Whitmore, who'd called that evening and said Gerald Carter's daughter without ceremony. Geez, as if it were the most complete description in the world. Geez. The alternator took 40 minutes. She got Donna's car running and followed her back to town to make sure the charge held. Geez. And by the time she got back to the shop, it was noon, and Danny had sandwiches from the diner on the workbench and a look on his face that meant he'd heard something. Geez. Advisory board meeting ended at 11:30, he said. Geez, I figured. County contract is formally reinstated. Geez. They also passed a resolution requiring written justification for any review initiated against a contractor in good standing. Geez. 2 signatures required, neither from the official who received the original complaint. He handed her a sandwich. Geez. Ron Bassett proposed it. She unwrapped the sandwich. Geez, good. Ray Whitmore spoke for about 15 minutes. Geez. People are saying it was. Danny searched for the word. Geez. She looked at him. You were there? I went on my lunch break. Geez. I sat in the back. He shrugged, a little defensively. Geez. I wanted to hear it. She didn't ask him to repeat it. Geez. She could piece together what Ray had said from the structural facts, the tone of it. Geez. The public nature of it, the specific outcome it had produced. Geez. She could imagine his voice in a county meeting room. Geez. Steady and without excuse, using the same measured authority he'd spent decades building. Geez. And directing it entirely inward at his own failure to prepare his son correctly for the world that his reputation had shielded him from. Geez, that image sat with her. It was not comfortable. It was also, geez, she thought, exactly right. Did Logan attend? She said. Geez, he was there in the back too. Danny paused. He didn't speak. She nodded. Geez. She ate her sandwich. The radio in the bay played something old and easy. Geez, the kind of song that sat under a conversation without interrupting it. Geez, how are you doing, she said. Danny looked up. Me? Geez, how are you actually doing? Not the shop you. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved rather than deflecting it. Geez, which was one of the things she valued most about him. Geez, better than 2 weeks ago, he said. When those texts were coming in, geez, he stopped. I didn't want to tell you how scared I was. Geez, because you weren't scared and I didn't want to look. Danny, she said. Geez, I was scared. He looked at her. Not of Logan Whitmore, she said. Geez, but of losing this place, of having something my father built taken away through a back door by someone who didn't have the character to use the front. She paused. Geez, fear's not the problem. What you do with it is the thing. He was quiet for a moment. Geez, what did you do with it? I put it in the folder, she said. Geez. He blinked. Then he laughed, a real one, short and surprised. And the sound of it in the bay did something to the air in the room that Madison hadn't realized she'd been missing. Geez. She finished the sandwich. She put her gloves back on. Geez. She went back to work. Thursday brought something she hadn't anticipated. Geez. It was a phone call from a woman named Sandra Cho, who identified herself as the director of the Montana Small Business Coalition. He's a state-level advocacy organization that Madison knew existed but had never had reason to contact. Sandra Cho was direct and businesslike and got to the point in about 30 seconds. We read Peter Gaines's story in the Courier, she said. We've been looking for a documented case that illustrates the specific vulnerability of small owner-operated contractors to informal pressure campaigns through municipal networks. Yours is the most clearly documented example we've encountered in 3 years of tracking this issue. A brief pause. I'd like to ask whether you'd be willing to speak at our annual conference next March. Ease. Not about the personal elements, about the documentation process. Ease. How you built the record, what channels you used, what you'd do differently. Madison stood in the office with the phone in her hand and looked at the filing cabinet where the folder lived. It's under W, with its careful label. Let me think about it, she said. Please, of course, take your time. A pause. For what it's worth, ease. Miss Carter, what you did, the way you did it, is exactly what we spend years trying to teach business owners. Ease. Most people in your situation either react too fast or endure too long. Ease, you calibrated it exactly right. After she hung up, ease, she sat with that for a minute. Calibrated it exactly right. Ease. She thought about the 2 in the morning she'd lain awake, counting the shortfall. Ease. The moment she'd opened the lockbox for the first time in 14 months. Ease. The conversation with Vic. The coffee in the lot with Cole. Ease. She thought about all the moments where it had felt like anything but calibration, where it had felt like survival. Ease. Like stubbornness. Like the particular determination of a woman who had run out of options that felt good and was down to options that felt necessary. Ease. Calibrated right. Maybe. From the outside. From the inside, it had mostly felt like keeping her hands on the work and refusing to let go. Ease. She called Sandra Cho back. I'll do it, she said. Ease. March works. The second week after the story ran, ease. Something began happening in Silver Creek that was harder to quantify than restored contracts or advisory board resolutions. Ease. People started coming in. Not for service calls necessarily, though those increased too. Ease. A steady uptick that Danny tracked in the scheduling book with a running tally he'd started keeping without being asked. Ease. But people came in for other reasons. A woman who ran the flower shop on Main Street stopped by on a Tuesday with a casserole dish and a card that said nothing about the Whitmore situation, but that felt ease in the weight of it, like everything about it. 2 men from the county road crew came in on Thursday afternoon. Ease, ostensibly to ask about a service schedule, but really, ease. It was clear to stand in the shop for a while and let their presence communicate something. Ease. Gloria Haynes, the retired school teacher who ran the community Facebook group and had taken down the post, came in on Friday morning and sat in the customer waiting area chair and said, "Ease, I've been thinking about what I should have done differently when that post went up. Ease, I should have called you directly instead of just removing it." "You removed it fast," Madison said. "Ease, not fast enough." Gloria folded her hands in her lap. "Ease, I've been running that group for 6 years. And I've never had something like that go up. Ease, I want you to know I've put a moderator review process in place. Ease, 2-person approval on any post that names a local business or individual." She paused. Ease. "Gerald would have come and told me that to my face if he thought I'd handled something poorly." "He would have," Madison agreed. Ease. "You're more patient than he was." "He was more patient than people gave him credit for," Madison said. Ease. "He just made it look like something else." Gloria smiled the smile of someone who had known Gerald for decades and recognized the truth of that. "You're his," she said. It came out with the same quality Ray Whitmore's line had carried. Ease, the same compact completeness, as if the 4 words resolved something rather than just described it. Ease. Madison thought she might be getting used to hearing that. Ease. She thought her father might have planned it that way. Ease. The twist that nobody in Silver Creek had seen coming arrived on a Friday afternoon. Ease. 3 weeks after the Courier story, in the form of Logan Whitmore walking into Carter Towing with his father. Ease. Madison was in the bay. Danny was at the front desk. Ease. He came to get her with the expression of someone who had seen something he wasn't sure how to report. "Ease, Logan's here," he said. With his dad, she put down the wrench. "Ease." She wiped her hands. She walked through to the customer area. Ease. Ray Whitmore was 64 years old, and the first thing she noticed was that he was smaller than she'd imagined from his reputation, not in presence. Ease, which was substantial, but in physical scale. He was medium height. Ease. Broad through the shoulders in the particular way of men who had spent their lives in training. Ease, with hands that were large and scarred in the specific patterns of a boxer's hands. Ease. And eyes that were a direct, uncomplicated gray that took in the room the way competent people's eyes do thoroughly. Ease, without performing the thoroughness. He looked at her, and he extended one of those scarred hands. He's Madison, he said. I'm Ray. She shook it. His grip was careful, the grip of someone who knows exactly how strong they are and manages it deliberately. I know who you are, she said. Thank you for coming. I should have come sooner, he said. I should have come the week the review notice went out and asked what was going on. He glanced at Logan briefly. Then back to her, I didn't know. That's true. But I also didn't ask. And a man who's built his name on straight dealing ought to notice when things in his orbit aren't straight. You didn't do this, she said. No, he agreed. But my name was used to do it. There's a responsibility in that, whether I meant it or not. Logan stood slightly behind and to the right of his father. And he was different here than he'd been in the lot on the day of Cole's visit, and different again from how he'd been on Monday morning. In his father's presence, something in him had reorganized, not diminished, but recalibrated, and not in a performative way. He looked like a man who had spent 3 weeks in a very hard conversation with himself and had arrived at something he didn't fully love but understood was true. I want to propose something, Logan said. She looked at him. Go ahead. The county is putting together a small business support initiative. Grant funding for local sole proprietors to improve equipment and expand capacity. My father sits on the steering committee. He paused. I'd like to recommend Carter Towing for the first round of consideration. New diagnostic equipment, potentially a third truck. Another pause. Not as compensation, not as an apology payment, as a genuine endorsement of a business that deserves to grow. She was quiet for a moment. That committee makes independent decisions, she said carefully. If Carter Towing meets the criteria, I'll apply through the process. But I'm not going to accept a recommendation that comes with any kind of string or obligation, even an implied one. Logan held her gaze. No strings, he said. I don't expect anything from you. He stopped. I'm not trying to buy my way back to neutral. I understand that's not how it works. He glanced at his father. A quick look before returning to her. I'm trying to do something useful. That's different. She looked at him for a long time. She looked at Ray, who was watching this exchange with the expression of a man who was letting his son stand on his own in a conversation that mattered. Which was its own form of parenting, the kind that was hard to watch and necessary. Apply through the committee's standard process, Ray said. Logan can submit the recommendation letter. The committee will evaluate it independently. He met her eyes. You'll get exactly the same consideration any other applicant gets. I'll see to it personally. She thought about what her father would say. She knew exactly what he would say, which was the same thing he would have said about the alternator in Logan Sierra and the county contract, and every single job and invoice over the 32 years he'd run this place. Take what's fairly offered, account for it correctly. Do good work. Send me the application materials, she said. I'll decide whether to apply. Ray Whitmore nodded. Something in his face settled, not relief exactly, but the particular quality of a resolution that isn't quite finished, but has found its direction. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He turned and looked at the service bay behind her at the space. The equipment, the 2 trucks visible through the open bay door. At the general evidence of a business that had been built carefully and maintained with the kind of attention that came from someone who genuinely loved the work. Your father built this from nothing, he said. From a loan and a lot of stubbornness, she agreed. Ray almost smiled. Best foundation there is. He looked back at her. I'm sorry, Madison. Plainly and without qualification. What happened to you this month was wrong, and I'm sorry it happened through my name. She held his apology the way you hold something fragile carefully. With both hands. I accept that, she said. And then, because it was true, and because he deserved to hear it, my father respected you. He thought you were a man who did things right. I think that reputation was correctly earned. She paused. This conversation is part of why. Ray Whitmore looked at her for a moment with the gray eyes that took things in completely. Then he nodded once, the nod of someone who has received something they'll carry, and extended his hand again. She shook it. Logan shook her hand after his father. And when she looked at him this time, she saw something she hadn't seen in any of their previous encounters, not the confidence, not the condescension, not the raw discomfort of the lot or the careful humility of Monday morning. She saw a man who was at the beginning of a longer journey and knew it. Who understood that the lesson he was in the middle of learning was not a temporary inconvenience but a structural revision. The kind that rearranges how you see yourself permanently. She didn't tell him that. He'd figure it out, or he wouldn't. That part was his. They left. The shop went quiet again. Danny appeared from the direction of the bay where he'd been a tactful distance away during the whole conversation. He was looking at her with the expression she'd come to think of as his full attention faced the face he made when he was processing something that mattered. He's Ray Whitmore, he said. In person. In person, she confirmed. He's shorter than I expected. Most legends are. Danny was quiet for a moment. You're going to apply for the grant. Maybe, he looked at her. New diagnostic equipment would mean we could handle jobs we currently turn away. I know. A third truck would mean I could train someone. Part-time to start. She looked at him. She thought about what it meant to grow something, not just to preserve it, not just to defend it, but to actually build it forward into the future. The way her father had taken a loan and a piece of ground and turned it into something that had outlasted him. She thought about Gerald Carter's hands, the note above the desk. Let me see the application, she said. Danny's expression moved into something she could only describe as satisfactions, the deep kind. Not the superficial kind, the kind that sits in the chest and doesn't need to announce itself. I'll email Sandra Cho, she said, for the conference. And I'll get the application materials from the county committee. She picked up her gloves from the counter. But right now, we have a 2 o'clock coming in, and I haven't finished the morning paperwork. Already logged, Danny said. 214 Silverado, ball joint and alignment check. I pulled the service history. She stopped. You pulled it before they called. Earl mentioned at the diner that his neighbor was having steering issues. I figured he'd call. Danny shrugged. I know how you like to be prepared. She looked at him. This 22-year-old who had come to her through a vocational program 3 years ago, who'd learned the filing system and the dispatch rhythm and the billing structure and, apparently, the particular proactive intelligence that her father had always said was the real engine of a great shop. Danny, she said. Yeah, you're getting a raise. He blinked. He hadn't seen that coming, which meant she'd timed it correctly. Okay, he said a little unevenly. Effective this week. I should have done it 2 months ago. I'll catch it up. She pulled on her first glove. Don't make it weird. I'm not making it weird, he said. You're making it weird. I'm not. He cleared his throat. Thank you. Don't thank me. You earned it. She pulled on the second glove. Now go log the Silverado appointment before you forget what you already know. He went. She stood in the customer area alone for a moment. Through the front window, she could see the lot empty now. Just the 2 service trucks and Danny's repaired Chevy and the Montana Sky doing what the Montana Sky did in October, which was to go a particular shade of gray-blue that she had loved since childhood without ever finding the right word for. She thought about Cole's motorcycles in that lot 3 weeks ago. The sound of them leaving. She thought about the first call on Route 9 at 6:43 in the morning and the voice that had asked whether she knew who he was. She thought about the folder under W in the filing cabinet and the note above her desk and the lockbox in the bottom drawer and the old phone that she'd put back in the lockbox after Vic's number had served its purpose. The battery pulled out again, settled back into its dormancy, not because she was closing the door, but because she understood. Again, the difference between a door that was closed and a door that was simply at rest. She had lived 2 lives. That was the truth, stated plainly. She had been a young woman who left a small town and found her place in a world that most people in Silver Creek would not have understood and did not need to. She had been a person of consequence in that world, not despite her character, but because of it, because the same qualities that made her hold a billing line against a man twice her confidence had made her someone worth standing beside when things got hard. She had left that life whole. Not running. Not ashamed. And she had come home and built something out of a different kind of loyalty, the loyalty of a daughter who meant to honor the simplest and most permanent instruction her father ever gave her. Keep it honest and it'll keep you. She had kept it honest. She had kept it honest through 6 years of a life that asked for other things. And through the return, and through 4 years of running the shop, and through 32 days of a pressure campaign that was designed specifically to make her bent. She had not bent, she was still here. And Carter towing the 2 trucks and the filing system and the customer waiting room with the Field and Stream magazines and the coffee maker and the framed note that held the whole philosophy of the place in 11 words was still here too. Intact, documented. Moving forward, she went to the bay. She put her hands on the work. The radio was playing something low and she turned it up slightly because she liked the way music sat in the space when the shop was active. The way it kept the air from going too quiet. Danny was at the front desk entering the Silverado appointment. She could hear him typing. She could hear the sound of the town outside cars on the highway. A dog somewhere, the particular ambient frequency of a small place that knew itself completely and was content with that knowledge. Earl Hutchins called at 3 to check on his brake job. Which she'd done 2 weeks ago, and she told him the pads were wearing exactly right and that she'd see him at his next service interval. And he said, you know, your dad used to say that exact thing at the end of every service call. In the same tone. Like it was the most natural thing in the world to have kept something working. She stood in the bay with the phone against her ear and let that sentence be exactly what it was. Thanks, Earl, she said. Don't thank me, he said. Just keep the shop open. That's the plan, she said. She hung up. She went back to the work. Outside Silver Creek went on being exactly what it had always been: small. Particular. Full of people who thought they knew each other's stories and mostly did. And occasionally discovered they'd been underestimating someone in the specific and consequential way that happened when a person had been quietly extraordinary for so long that the quiet had become all people bothered to see. Madison Carter had never needed anyone to see it. She had simply needed the work. The honest invoice. The documented record. The cup of coffee in the lot with people who knew the whole truth of her and had never once asked her to be smaller than she was. She had needed the note on the wall and the shop her father built and the knowledge, deep and structural and entirely her own, that the strongest thing a person could carry into a fight was not a weapon or a reputation or a past that could unsettle the person across the table. The strongest thing was a record that could not be argued with. A name that had been earned rather than inherited. A character built quietly. Over years. Through every small, honest choice, the ones no one witnessed. The ones that didn't make the paper. The ones that simply accumulated like deposits in an account that paid out exactly when you needed it most. Logan Whitmore had stood in her shop and looked at her and seen a tow driver. He had learned slowly and at considerable cost to his own pride and his father's reputation, what she actually was. And she was still here, and the shop was still running, and Danny was at the front desk entering the 2:14 appointment, and the radio was playing something good, and the Montana October light was doing its gray-blue thing through the shop windows. And Carter Towing was going to be here tomorrow and next month, and for every year that Madison Carter chose to keep her hands on it. That was not a hope or a wish or a plan subject to revision. That was simply a fact. The same kind her father had built his whole life out of one honest day at a time, until the accumulation of them became something no one could take away.